And we're specifically talking about communication in the later stages of the disease. We have been talking about early stage and middle stage and just what the common challenges are as far as communication for the person that has the diagnosis and for us that are caring for them. What are those challenges and how can we best overcome them to still be able to communicate successfully with each other, right? And communication, you know, just what it is, it's how we got to express our wants, our desires, our likes, our dislikes. And it's a combination of words, but it's our attitude, it's our tone of voice, it's our facial expressions, our body language. There's a chart breakdown that really all communication, about 55% of it is body language. 35% of it, I guess, is that right? It would be tone of voice. And just about 7% of it is the words that we use as we communicate, because there's so much involved in communication, which is good when it comes to dementia, because with dementia, those living with the diagnosis, in the early stages of the disease, they're starting to lose their words. But their need to communicate never changes. That never goes away. To need to tell you what my wishes and wants and likes and dislikes are. It's how they're able to communicate is what changes. And that continuously changes as the disease progresses into the later stages. It's an important part of our relationship because it's how we relate to one another too, how we communicate with each other. And I highlighted it this last bullet point. It's more about listening than talking. And that is especially true in the later stages of this disease. And we really want to focus on comfort and sensory stimulation, sensory connections with people in the later stages, because this is what remains with them. And we want to work with what they still have. So it is a time for maximum need. We'll get into some things to expect in the later stages, but maximum need and care for our loved ones, but also for us as their family and friends and the ones providing care too. Because it is so incredibly difficult. And just to show this picture again, to get us where we're at, you know, on the left side of the screen is a normal brain, and the right side is somebody very advanced, Alzheimer's disease, and your typical dementias as well are going to look the same. So we can see that there are a lot of changes that have happened to somebody that's living with this disease, but there's also still a lot there. So we do want to focus on what still remains, because that's what we have to be able to communicate and connect with our loved ones. In the later stages of the disease, they are going to need round-the-clock care, because now they are generally physically affected. If they haven't been before, they're having not only severe language breakdowns and having a hard time using their words to communicate, they may have 10 words a day, and that's a lot. It's kind of closer to maybe 1 or 2 words that they can use a day. So we really got to be aware of what their body language is telling us. We got to use their facial expressions, that nonverbal communication as a guide for us to know what they're trying to tell us. They're also having a much harder time understanding the words we're using. So they're going to be able to pick up on our body language, our nonverbal communication way quicker than they will the words that we use. Their actions and behaviors are going to be their main form of communication. In the early stages, they had more words and that starts to diminish. In the middle stages, they are starting to use more behaviors, but they still had some words. And now we're in the later stages, and it really is the main form of their communication is their actions and behaviors and emotions. So we got to be able to read our loved ones, right? They may not recognize their family and friends or even themselves at this point, but they know when somebody's important, or they know when they feel safe with somebody, right? They just might not know what the relationship is at that time. They may sleep more during the day, and when they're awake, they might be semi-alert. So this is going to change how we communicate with them too, or how we get their attention. I'll talk about that more here in a second. Not going to be able to complete a 2-stage command, so we'll need to manage our expectations on what they're able to do. It's not that they can't do it. We're just going to have to modify it even more so So giving them one thought at a time and really probably physically helping them do an activity, especially a self-care activity, whether it's getting dressed or eating at the dinner table. They're going to need more physical help or physical cues to get that action started or to continue that action. You may notice they have some repetitiveness in their motion or in speech or sound. So they might be saying the same word over and over again, or it might be a moan or a grunt, or they're going to rock back and forth. They can rub their hands together. You know, anything that's just a repetitive motion. And this can be a form of comfort for them. But it also, you do want to make sure and look for any physical signs that might be causing them pain. We want to rule that out to make sure we know. But a lot of the times that repetitiveness or that perseveration is a form of self-comfort for them. They're having a loss or less ability to control their movement. And this is especially true when it comes to reflexes or rigid muscles. So they might like grab onto the roll at the dinner table and they might be able to take a bite of it, but they can't let go of it. That's reflex is what's working, but they're not as in control of it. And have less skill. So they're not able to use their skill fingers as well, but they can still have that strength, like grab onto something and not be able to let go. They're going to need total care for those self-care activities, but we always want to encourage their participation in the activity. And this comes down to preserving that dignity and their independence and their sense of self and sense of purpose. So while we may be physically helping them, whether it's at the dinner table or it's on the toilet or it's in the getting dressed every day, we need to make sure that they're included in that activity. And this is using hand under hand. So we put, we kind of go and hold their hands, but we're underneath their hand and supporting them. And while we might have hold of the utensil, or we have hold of the clothes that we're helping put on them, we're moving their arm in the same motion that they would have moved it in themselves. So especially at the dinner table, I'm moving their hand with the spoon in their mouth up to, or spoon in the hand up to their mouth, and they're going through the same movement that they would have if they were feeding themselves. And essentially they still are, even though we're physically helping them. And this is a huge form of connecting and communicating with them. First of all, it stimulates the neurons that they still have, and it keeps them involved in their life still, especially at the later stages of the disease. We're facilitating their life for them, and we want to make sure that they have the highest quality of life they can have. And they can still have a high quality of life. It's going to look different in the later stages than it did in the early stages. But we want to make sure that we're facilitating that for them. We also giving their visual cues, verbal cues, and those touch cues for each activity. So as well, we're physically helping them and giving those physical cues, touch cues. We want to make sure we're telling them what we're doing and being aware of what they're able to see and how they're seeing their world. And I'll get to that more here in a second. But also knowing that they may have more extreme reactions to care if we don't approach them correctly, because they are more confused about what's going on, especially in their immediate world. They're very more than likely kind of closed into their very small world of what they can see and stimulation they can take in. So they're more confused, and if we startle them or surprise them or we're moving too fast, they're not going to understand what's going on, and they can feel threatened or scared or startled, and they'll respond in a way that might be like they hit, or they might yell out or scream or something. And that's a form of communication, like, I don't like this, or you startled me, or we need to try this again. You need to do a different approach to help me understand a little bit better. So what's remaining in those later stages is they are going to respond more to things that stimulate their senses. So whether it's the sound or the vision or what they smell or taste, they'll respond more to that than they will to the words. So we need to find ways that stimulate somebody's senses to help them with how they feel in that moment too. So this is that sensory stimulation. How do we connect with them with their senses? Some more tactile stuff is very important, but also knowing that we got to do it in that moment. So they are living from moment to moment. This moment, they may like that and enjoy it. The next moment, they may not. So we'll have to find something else. And this can include just feeling different fabrics like wool or fleece, listening to their favorite songs, and songs from probably their childhood, something that would be familiar to them, smell or taste that's familiar from things from their past, petting animals, running your hands through water. If you can connect with nature, I said they'll always have the ability to connect with nature. So maybe you listen to the birds, the wind chimes. If there's wind, you can hear those wind chimes. And like I said, running your hands through water or feeling rocks or even sand. There's a therapy to connecting with nature as best you can. And somebody's reactions will be influenced by their environment and how they feel. So if they're in a positive environment or a familiar environment, they're going to react better. It's going to feel more safe for them, as opposed to an environment that might be really noisy, or it's not a familiar environment, or I'm not sure what's going on. They will respond. And they're telling you something. They're telling you, I either like this, or I feel safe and I'm comforted here, or I don't like this. We need to find something different. They'll always have that automatic social chit chat. So those short, hey, how are you doing? You look good. It's good to see you. They can respond to that short automatic social chit chat. And the reason that is because it's held in the rhythm part of our brain. And they'll always have that rhythm. And that's where music is at. That's where prayers are at, or meditations, affirmations, those anything that's rhythmic will stay. They'll even keep the rhythm of speech, but they may lose the words, but they have the rhythm. So you can tell if they're asking a question or didn't have a word, but you could tell I was asking you a question, right? So they're going to keep that rhythm. So nonverbal communication is going to be the key in the later stages. So they're going to react to how we communicate something before they process the what, or even if they process the what. And this can be anything from I'm moving too fast and I'm communicating possibly frustration or exhaustion, or I'm communicating love and connection. So we do want to make sure and go at their pace. And this is physically and verbally, and how fast are we moving our arms to help them with that self-care activity. They can only go at the pace they can go, and they can really only process at the pace they can process. So we've got to be able to go at their pace in all things. Speak clearly, maintain that eye contact, and actively listen. Like I said at the beginning, this is more about listening than it is talking. So we really listen to what is their body language, what was that facial expression they just had, what was that short, slow, or sudden movement that might have been subtle, but it was sudden. What was that? And kind of be a detective and get curious and ask more questions. What are they trying to communicate? Go ahead and expect shorter interactions and set up something for a shorter interaction. If you know that you want to look at photos with them, it might be a 5-minute interaction, or it might be a 2-minute interaction. I wouldn't expect 30 minutes because their attention span is really, really short. Their ability to focus for a long time is just not there. And they can get easily tired. So we do want to make sure that we're incorporating plenty of stimulation in their day that they can do, stimulation that meets their abilities, but also rest. I have no doubt how tiring it is to have dementia in the later stages and having to filter out all the stimulation from the day and from what people are wanting me to do with what I have. So I want to make sure that I am stimulated, but I also need to rest. My brain needs to rest because it can only do so much. We can continue to get their attention, especially during a self-care activity, by saying their name. Just keep repeatedly say their name to grab their attention, or you can gently pump the palm of their hand. And it's just a just a gentle pump, but that kind of grabs your attention. If you do that, you just hold somebody's hand here in a minute and pump their hand and see what their eyes do. It kind of goes to that. You grab their attention. So you can do that to help gain their attention back on what you want them to do. And also being very aware of what their field of vision is. Their world is so much smaller in many ways. And one of those ways is their field of vision. In the late stages, it can be like they're looking through a monocular. And if you want to hold up, close off one eye and just look through this one eye, close off one eye and look through one of them. The world is very small at that point. It's not that they can't see, it's just small. The brain can only take in stimulation from one eye at that point. And so I want to make sure if I'm giving them instructions or I'm visually showing them something, that it's within their field of vision. So being aware of that. Excuse me. And if they are asleep or you're not sure if they're asleep, because a lot of times they might fall asleep in their chair, right? One of the best things to do to grab their attention in a non-startling way is to start low on the body at a joint. And then generally the knee is one of the best places to start. So just placing, if this was my knee, just placing your hand over their knee with a light pressure, not this and rubbing it or patting it, because that can stimulate the nerves in a negative way, but just holding it and maybe kind of squeezing the knee a little bit and see if that gains their attention. And then if that doesn't, if they're not really responding to that, then you can maybe go up to an elbow if that's available, or the shoulder. You always want to go to a joint as opposed to a big muscle belly, because that can be negatively exciting, just those muscles and the nerves there. But this is a nice way to get somebody's attention or even wake somebody up in a non-startling way. And the lower you start on the body, the safer it is for everybody, whether they're in a chair or a bed as well, and just kind of get their attention from there and then wake them up, or maybe they were awake, but they were just in their little world. So using that compassion and sensory communication. So touch and music are going to be huge. What are those 5 senses that we can use to connect with them and communicate? Again, but being aware of how the environment's going to influence their ability to communicate. If there's too much going on, they can get easily frustrated or anxious. And when we're anxious or frustrated, we have a harder time communicating. It's the same for our loved ones in the later stages, but they are more sensitive to the environment. We want to make sure that we're using more visual gestures, more cues to demonstrate what we are showing or asking or saying. Just act something out. And knowing that they're going to mirror what we're doing. So if we are showing frustration, they're going to be able to process that and usually behave in kind. But we also want to use it to our advantage. Let's mirror what their nonverbal body language is. And we're able to do that. That is communicating with them that I hear you and I'm connecting with you. We certainly don't want to talk about them like they're not there or like they don't understand. Don't ever assume what they understand or don't understand. They understand a lot. While they may not quite get the content or the words, they're going to understand the emotions and that tone of voice. And they can generally tell or get the feeling if somebody's talking about them or they're being excluded from a conversation, and nobody wants that. And we don't want to pull away from them at this time. I know this is one of the hardest times for families, but we want to nurture that relationship. It's okay if you don't know what to say or do. Just being present with them. I'm fully focused and actively engaged and present with them. Being their friend is the most important. It's really focusing on that support and comfort for them. Like I said, this late stage care decisions can be some of the hardest for the families to face at this point. Like I said earlier, we are preserving their quality of life and their dignity. So a lot of modifications and adaptations might need to take place to be able to do that. And a lot more time on the caregiver's part, because it's going to take longer to have them get through a meal, for instance. It can take up to an hour just to get through a lunch if we're doing it in a way that promotes independence and dignity. So that's more time, but what is our main goal, right? Also, the later stages of the disease is the time we want to consider hospice if we haven't already started talking about it. The hospice care, that comfort care or palliative care, is an approach to help manage pain. But really the main goal is to keep them as comfortable as possible and have the highest quality of life they could possibly have. And this is the time that you really want to go on hospice or use hospice as their support, but also support for you. It's really extra sets of eyes on your loved one to help provide that best care and that best quality of life. So other ways to help connect and communicate: music is probably one of the first go-tos. Read from books that have meaning, especially from their childhood. It might be that it's you're reading some from the Bible or in a childhood book that was a favorite that they would recognize and be familiar with. Rub scent and lotion onto their skin. It's again using that sense of smell and that sense of touch, right? Brushing their hair, massaging their hands, sit outside, feel the wind, smell the air, hold their hands, anything like that. That's a connection and a communication. You're communicating, I care about you, when you're doing that stuff for your loved ones. So I want to show this video. It's about a 5-minute video. We have 5 minutes left. And then I kind of want to point out a couple of things for it. I will give you a warning. It is a tearjerker, but it's a great example of late stage communication and connecting and caring with somebody.
When people are very old and deteriorated and no one enters their world and they're just sitting there, they will withdraw inward more and more. And their desperate need for connection is all now inside. And if a person is all alone, even if they're very, very deteriorated, there's a longing for this kind of closeness. Mrs. Wilson, hello. You want me to sit? Can you see me good? Gladys Wilson is a wonderful example of a person who is in the phase of repetitive motion, where people use movements, repetitive movements, because they don't have any more speech or very little speech, but they have human needs that need to be expressed. You're crying. You're crying. You have a tear right here in your face. You have a little pain. You don't want me to touch you. You're very sad. Can you see me? Is it scary? Are you afraid? And if this person sits with their eyes closed, rocking back and forth, and maybe there's a tear coming down, there's a need there. There's a little tear that's coming out. Do you feel it? You feel a little tear? If you gently use touch, and I touched Gladys Wilson for the fingertips right here on the cheek, is where the mother usually touches a child. If you touch an infant there, it looks up, and every cell remembers where it was touched by the mother. And often that person knows, even if they can't say a word at that moment, they won't talk, or they don't want to talk, but there's a communication. And that person is no longer alone. Can you let me in a little bit? You think? Just a little? You think I could be with you and Jesus for a minute? Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. I used music, because when speech is gone, music, especially with Gladys Wilson, it was religious music, because there's emotion tied to it and safety tied to it. So I used her old church songs. Jesus loves me, yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me, the Bible tells me so. What I did was, when she moved, I moved with her. And when I was singing, because she didn't sing with me, so I matched the intensity of my voice to the intensity of her movement. And pretty soon, for a split second, we became one person. Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. So at one point, when she got very quiet and very peaceful, and my voice became very quiet as hers and very peaceful, and my breathing slowed to her breathing, she pulled me to her, and I moved with her. And for her, at that moment, I believe I was a symbol of her mom. Can you open your eyes now? Do you see me? Feel safe and warm? Yes? Can you sing with me? He's got the whole world in his hands. 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 He's got the mothers and the fathers. He's got the mothers and the fathers in his hand. He's got the mothers and the fathers in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hand. The breakthrough doesn't happen every time. The person will not always open their eyes and look at you. But if you keep trying and you keep centering yourself and really look at that person and really mirror their movements, maybe not this time, but the next time you come, you'll have a communication. You feel safe. You feel safe? Yeah. With Jesus? Yeah. And me?
So everybody take a deep breath in and release it. A few things about that video, which I love and I hate all at the same time, because it is beautiful, but it does make me cry every time. That while somebody in the later stages may be tucked away, essentially they're still there, and we can always connect with them. And I will say, even though, and Gladys said that on the video, there's not always the breakthrough. There's not always somebody will open their eyes and look at you or will sing with you. But that doesn't mean that you didn't make that connection with them either. So taking the time to center yourself, or just like, I'm going to be present with my loved one, and whether you're holding their hand or you're listening to music with them, you're in the moment with them. So you're moving with them, mirroring them. A lot of what Gladys did, she moved with Naomi, moved with Gladys, raised the intensity of her voice, got calm and quiet when Gladys did, and made that connection. Whether Gladys ever gave her the feedback, essentially we always hope for, that doesn't mean the connection's not made. So I want to open up if there's any questions or comments or anything about late stage.